Hello, welcome back. Now we're going to be working on lesson number 25. So without further ado, let's begin. Velo Natan, and he didn't give. Adonai lechem, so the Lord did not give to you. Ledat, to know. Ve'anaim, and eyes. Lirot, to see. Va'aznaim, and ears. Lishmoa, to listen or to hear. Ad, until Hayom Hazeh, this day. Alright, so before we begin with this one and breaking it apart, let's think about the very fact of what this passage is saying. God is literally saying to Moses, and Moses is literally transferring this information to the people, that the Lord had not given to the people to know, to have ears to see, eyes to see, and ears to listen. Does this really mean that God hasn't given anybody really the ability to listen and to see? It's an important thing to think about. This passage is not to be taken literal. It doesn't literally mean that God is saying that He's not given anybody the ability to know, nor is He given anybody the eyes and the ears. What the Torah is trying to tell us here, by the mouth of Moshe, is we do actually have the ability to listen. We do actually have the eyes to actually see. But there's really a problem. And what's that? Well, it's us. We're the problem. The passage is telling us that we're really the problem as to reason as to why we don't see things and why we don't hear things. And of course, why we don't understand. So that means we have to humble ourselves, and we have to be willing to know the truth, to want the truth, and to follow the truth in order for God to open up our eyes and open up our ears. If we're not willing to open up our eyes and open up our ears because our attitude is not wanting to know truth, then by the mouth of Moshe, he's saying that we're not given understanding. Our eyes will not be able to see, and our ears will not be able to hear. It's our choice. We have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to be challenged. So, let's break down this passage now grammatically. Velo. Vav here is the Vav conjunction, which means, it means the word and. Lo is the adverb, which means it's negating. So remember, whenever we're dealing with the adverb of negation, this just merely means we're going to make a negative statement. So instead of trying to memorize what does lo mean, always think of lo as the adverb that is going to negate a statement. Once we get to the word, we can decide how is it we are going to negate the statement. Let's look for example here. If I said lo po, po is the word here. So, if I know that lo is a negation of it, then I know that I can translate this not here. You understand what I'm saying? Let's try another word. let's try using a verb in a sense. If I say lo amar, I know amar means said. So if I'm going to make this a negative statement, well, if I know amar means he said, then I'm going to say, well, he didn't say. This is something that I think is important, because sometimes what happens is when we're dealing with the issues of words, especially when we're dealing with how words can change. You notice how lo po meant not here, but obviously lo amar didn't mean not said, because we know it's he said. You follow what I'm saying here? If I was to say lo means not, well, I'm always going to get caught in a trap. And that trap is going to be, I'm going to have to fight with saying the word not, and be going to scratch my head and saying, well, that doesn't really fit the context here. That's why I want you to think of the word lo as just a negative sense. Lo is always the negation, okay? So, I'm going to look for the word that's next to it, verb or noun, to identify how am I going to negate something. And therefore, I can choose how to say this in the opposite sense of what it means when I read it in its normal form. So here, the word Natan. Well, this is the third person, masculine singular form, which means gave. Literally, it is he gave. Now, I have to look for the next word to see, which the double yuds mean that this is the word Adonai. That this tells me that since I know Adonai is a third person masculine singular noun, it's agreeing with my verb. So that means this is the subject of the verb. So I have to remember to attach the subject back to the verb. So instead of he gave, it's the Lord. So here I'm going to put the Lord, and then I'm going to translate my negative part here, which would be did not. And of course, lastly, Natan, which means gave, we're going to put exactly the same form. The Lord did not, but in this sense, we're using the word give. I want you to know something here and think about this. This is one of the complexities that is difficult with dealing with the issue of English versus obviously Hebrew. And what is going to be the problem? Well, this is the thing that you're going to see, that you're going to come across. Maybe you don't. I know that I struggle with it a lot of times when I was starting the beginning. And I still at times have to go back and fight against it. And what is that? You notice the word give here? Give is a command statement. Give me $1, right? But here, it's not a command statement. Why? Because it's the past tense form when we say, and the Lord did not give. But if I said, and he did not give, it's the same thing. Sometimes we get struggled and we get caught up in the grammar of one language, and we have to learn to fight against it with regard to the other language. Just remind yourself, how would you say gave in the past tense? And then under what circumstance would you say it in this form? Well, he gave me $1 bill. But if I said in the negative form, he didn't give me $1 bill. It's kind of funny that we have the problem with English, where English we use a different verb. It's a completely different verb form. He didn't give versus he gave. And the positive sense is he gave. If the negative sense is he didn't give. kind of the funny part that we have when we deal with the fact of how we can see this with other verbs in English. For example, he spent money on pizza. Or he bought money with pizza. He didn't spend money on pizza. He spent money on pizza. You see how spend and spent, this is the frustration you're going to come across. It's a part of, unfortunately, having to fight against the issue of English. English, we have too many words that incorporate different tenses. One word we only use in the negative form. One word we use in the positive form. One we see we use definitely in the past tense, but we have to use two different forms based upon whether it's a positive statement or whether it's a negative statement. And of course here in Hebrew, it doesn't matter. I know, that's where the Hebrew becomes the easier one and English becomes the harder one. Because if I said, Hu natan, he gave, Hu lo natan, he didn't give. Now we see Hebrew becomes the greater winner in this one. And you're going to see this a lot. I wanted to spend this time to even share that with you because I know that sometimes people struggle with these things, and well, this is why, is because we're looking at it from the different grammatical point of view. Because you got to think about it. You're going into Hebrew and you're saying, how do I say this in this way? And then we're looking at it from the grammatical standpoint. Well, okay, well, it's a past tense. It's got to be third person masculine and singular. It's got to be used like this. This is how we say it. And then we think in English, well, gosh, how come we don't say that in English? And then that's the kind of thing we start finding with is we didn't think so much about how we use this word or how we speak in the language because, well, it's just part of our everyday speech. But when we're actually having to identify and organize our thoughts with relationship to the structure, we begin to find the confusion. That give, which would be a command statement, and then did not, we find that we have to use the word did, which is a helping verb. And then, of course, we have the word not, which is our negation. Food for thought. So, lo natan Adonai. So here we have to put the word and to complete off the vav particle. So, and the Lord did not give. And the next part here is what? Lachem. Now, remember, I taught you earlier that la is only used with all other verb forms except verbs of speech and verbs of movement. And what did we learn? Natan is a verb of movement. So therefore, this is not the correct form. The correct form should have been this. Elechem. So there's something to learn here. Something to figure out. Think about it. So, lechem is our preposition, which means to. So here, we have to remember, we have a pronoun at the end. And chem is our second person plural pronoun. Meaning to, you, plural. So think about this. Who's the subject of the sentence? Well, we know that the Lord is the subject of the sentence. Who's the object of the sentence? Well, it's you, plural. You see how when you translate things in English, you kind of start losing the ability to figure out, well, what's the real object here? If I was to read this in English, I might think you just meant you singularly. But because this is written in the plural form, well, now we're having to see this as you as a whole, not you as an individual. Let's go to the next word. Ladat. Ladat. What is ladat? Ladat is the infinitive. Now, let's learn something about infinitives. Infinitives are very important to understand because they come in basically, well, let's call it 3 different forms. Okay? Alright. The infinitive comes in 3 different forms. We got the basic. This is going to be the verb that starts with the lamed. For example, livnot, liknot, lishmoa, ledaber. These are all going to be your basic forms. You'll notice that la is always used. And in this case, it's always going to mean to. For example, liknot means to purchase. If I said, for example, livnot, it means to build. If I said lishmoa, it means to listen. You get my point? Infinitive. This is the form by which we are going to say to, and of course, the verb of the infinitive. So here we have to understand what this form is. Well, in this case, we have to go apart and begin ripping at the root. If I take the lamed away, all I'm left with is tav, ayin, and daled. Well, that may not be a good helping to understand this, because at this point, I might sit there and think, I'm confused. What do I do with this one? Because here, when we're left with the tav, ayin, and daled, you might think that the tav at the end is a part of the root. In this case, it's not. And matter of fact, in most cases, it's not going to be a part of the root ever. And here's the thing. Whenever we're dealing with the fact of certain verbs, we're going to see certain changes take place. For example, when we're dealing with verbs that end in a hey, such as ra'ah. Ra'ah is always going to be ot, which means all the hey verb endings are always going to be ot in the infinitive. That's why we're going to hear livnot, liknot. Those are our hey verb ending verbs. Okay? They're always going to have the ot sound. So I know if I see ot, I'm missing a hey at the end. And that's how we're going to find this. Okay? With relationship to most other verbs, we're going to find that most other verbs are going to be basically the 3 roots all connected. And we'll see the 3 verbs, the 3 root letters inside the actual infinitive form. In this case, this is actually the root yud, daled, ayin. And so the thing that we have to deal with here is this. Notice how we see the ayin. Well, that really doesn't play much of a role here. This is kind of one of those special clauses of this is how we use it in the infinitive. Because if you look down here, this root down here also has an ayin. But notice there's no tav at the end. So this is just one of those special things that we're going to find. But one thing we can understand a little more is the fact that there is still a missing letter. And that is the front one, yud. That being said, we have to understand something about this. When we're looking, for example, in this issue with relationship to these verbs, we're going to find that we have to memorize our verb charts. it's very important that we go through our verb charts and really get to know them and understand them so that we can do this properly. We want to be able to understand the verb charts in full, and we want to be able to look at our chart as we're looking at the context here. This is one of the things that we have to see so that we can look at it for ourselves and understand what is really going on here. And, well, with relationship to this thing, this is the thing we're going to find which is very common. And that is the fact that when we're dealing with yud verbs, you're going to find that we're going to see the tav is going to be placed predominantly at the end. So, ladat means to know. To know. We go over here and we have the vav. This here, of course, is our vav conjunction. So we know that this means and. Next we have is what we have next. We have to identify the fact that here, most prominently, when we see a vav, we're going to be asking two questions. Is it a verb? Is it a noun? That's predominantly where we're going to be seeing when we're looking at this thing. So here, this word is anaim, which is a noun. And I can tell because here I have the ending of yud and mem, which makes it a plural masculine noun. At least that's what it appears. So if I was to take the yud and the mem sofit off at the end, I know that what I'm left with is the word ein. And ein means basically I. Ein is I. One of the rules that we know with regard to nouns is all nouns that have to do with dual body parts are always going to be, that's right, feminine. So in this case, this is a tricky word that looked masculine, but in fact is feminine. And we find that predominantly as with regard to all other body parts. We're going to hear ears, ozen, oznaim. This is going to be plural. Okay? Yad, yadaim, once again plural. What does it look? Masculine. So here we're going to say ears. So and ears. Now of course, when we see this, we talked about the hey verb. We said that resh, aleph, hey, when we put in the infinitive, is always going to be resh, aleph, ot. So we know that this means to, and then here we have the word see. Come again here, we have our vav conversive. Excuse me, vav conjunction, I don't know why I said conversive. So we know the vav conjunction, once again, it's a part of, it's a word that's connecting elements of a sentence together. So here we have aznaim. So we know that we say the mam and the yud makes this a masculine plural noun. Like I said, at least from the appearance. When I'm left with this. Ozen. When I look in the back, I find that in the book, in the dictionary, the word ozen is the word for ear. Now I know this, two appendages, plural, doesn't necessarily mean that this is masculine. Because in that case, all dual appendages of body parts are feminine. So therefore we know that the dual part is the feminine. So here we're going to be writing it and ears. Remember, this is important because even though you may see this in the plural form, whether it's oznaim or whether it's anaim, always remember that if you ended up finding something like this and then the subject of the sentence is oznaim, always look for a feminine plural verb. This is what we're going to be looking for if we ever were to find what is the subject of the sentence when we see it's feminine. Because don't be tricked in thinking that because it has a yud mem that this is a masculine noun, because it is not. Lastly, we see lishmo'ah. which means to, and of course here is listen. Now, let's talk about verbs like I was telling you. You have three forms of verbs. You got your basic. Your basic form of the verb is normally your lamed and then of course your root. For example, like we said, or say lishmoa or lishmor. We know that this is your basic to and then whatever the actual verb. The other two forms we have is called the absolute and the construct. Okay? This absolute form is always going to be used where we're dealing with, for example, double inflection verbs. That is, for example, if you look on the actual chart, on the verb chart, you'll notice that you use the absolute form when you want to express